Okay. Um, my name is Calder Schweitzer, and I have the privilege today to announce our speaker for the evening. Maggie Stevenson has been with TIWLT full-time for almost a year now as our wildlife biologist and property manager for the farm at Glen Elb. Before coming on with us full-time, she actually did two stints with us as a summer student, and in that time, we realized that she is just an extremely skilled biologist and a very, very hard worker. She covers a lot of ground now in her position, assisting with field work and report writing, managing day-to-day operations at the farm at Glen Elb, and sitting in on our communications conservation groups, as well as our board at large, among many, many other responsibilities. In her relatively still short time that she's been here as a full-time employee, she has become a vital and integral part of the TIWLT team. So, without further ado, please welcome Maggie Stevenson. Maggie, take it away.
Awesome. Thank you for the excellent introduction, Calder. That's great. So I'm going to be talking today about invasive species. So I thought this would be a good chance as spring is here, and we had some really, really nice weather just this past weekend. Gotten a little bit cold on us again, but summer is coming and the invasive species will soon be out in full force. And so I thought this would be a good chance to give a bit of an introduction about invasive species and provide some details about invasive species that you might find in your own backyards. And I'm going to talk about how to identify these species. I'm mainly going to focus on invasive plant species, and then I'll talk briefly about ways that you can manage these species on your properties if you choose to. So first of all, what is an invasive species? So an invasive species is basically any living organism that's introduced to an area that's outside of its native range. So it can be a plant, an insect, an animal, or a pathogen or disease. They spread really, really quickly. They're very aggressive and they have no natural predators. So it allows them to take over habitats, and they can displace native species and reduce biodiversity. Some of them can cause some serious health issues as well. For example, it's pretty well known, the poison parsnip, as well as giant hogweed, can cause the skin rashes and irritation. Just to briefly go over the difference between non-native and invasive. Sometimes those words are used interchangeably, but there's a little bit of a difference between them. So non-native species, they've been introduced to the area, but many of them are actually can be beneficial to society and aren't threatening to diversity. So only a few of them have these invasive tendencies. So the invasive has been introduced, and they have negative impacts on the environment and on the economy and on society. So this slide goes over some of the pathways of spread. So invasive species can come here. Many of the ways that they come here is through their human influence, essentially. So in addition to the human influenced ways like intentional introductions, they can also spread through natural pathways as well. So like animal movement and wind. So some of these are some of these are pretty well known, like movement of firewood. That's the main introduction for species like emerald ash borer, for example. And they can also spread through trail use. So if people have been walking in an area where there's invasive species, the seeds can then be picked up on your boots and things like that, and they can just spread to wherever you're walking, basically. And so there are quite a few different ways that they can spread. So like boating and fishing, and horticulture as well. So I'll go over a few examples here first. I have a couple of slides that go over a few. There are many invasive species, so not going to talk about every single one, but the list just keeps growing. But these are some common ones that you probably know about. So we've got the common reed or Phragmites. That's the one that that you see all the time along roadways, along the 401. The big stands of grasses or reeds. In the middle, there's common buckthorn. I'll talk more about that one later on in the presentation. And then we've got the LDD moth, or it's called the gypsy moth or the spongy moth. They've changed the name quite a few times, so it's hard to keep up with what they're actually calling it now. A few more plants. There's dog strangling vine. I'll talk about that one later on as well. And then we have wild parsnip and garlic mustard. So just briefly to go over a little bit about this invasion curve. So it's interesting because the first section that you see there is prevention. So that's finding ways to keep invasive species out of an area. And then once the invasive species arrives, then management strategies are focused on eradication. So completely removing the population from the area. And as the longer that period goes on, the less likely you are to actually be able to remove the species from the area. So then it becomes more of containment. So managing the population so that it doesn't continue spreading, or for example, if there's a really unique species at risk plant or something like that, that you don't want the invasive species to invade, then it's more of controlling the population so it doesn't spread, so it doesn't keep on growing and reaching those areas that you don't want it to. And so as the longer it goes on, obviously the more it costs too. So there's an economic factor into invasive species control. And a good example of this one is zebra mussels. So it's estimated that the economic impact of zebra mussels now is around $75 to $91 million a year. So they're in Ontario only. So the zebra mussels cause a lot of damage to infrastructure and boats and things like that once they've become established. So that's a pretty big number that kind of gives a good example of this curve, how the longer it goes on, the more it costs to manage the populations. So the first species I'll talk about is garlic mustard. So it's native to Europe, and it was introduced to North America during the mid-1800s. It was introduced for its use as an edible herb because it has a very strong garlic smell and a similar taste. But once it was introduced, it quickly spread from herb gardens into the forests. So it's become one of Ontario's most aggressive forest invaders. It really takes over a forest understory and creates these dense stands where only garlic mustard grows there, essentially. And the seeds, they drop close to the parent plants, and they're spread through wildlife in this area, deer mainly, as well as pets and people. So as I mentioned, the pathway of spread there for trail use and things like that. So some of its impacts are that it displaces native wildflowers, so it grows in the same forests as our spring ephemeral wildflowers like trilliums. And so they threaten Ontario's species at risk plants as well in some of our forests. So there's a term called allelopathic. So what that means is that it produces chemicals in its roots that prevent other plants from growing there. So it creates an environment that the garlic mustard themselves are able to thrive in, but it reduces competition from other plants. And so it also interferes with the growth of fungi in the soil that bring nutrients to the roots of the plants. So again, allowing the garlic mustard to thrive while outcompeting the native plants. So I'll go over some ID features first, and then I'll show a slide with the pictures to go along as well. So the garlic mustard is a plant that takes 2 years to reach maturity, to be able to flower and produce seeds. So the first year, it's a small basal rosette of these dark green kidney-shaped leaves. And the second year, the plant grows up to a little over 1 meter high. And it has triangular, sharply toothed leaves that are arranged alternately along the stem of the plant. Small white flowers are produced in the second year. And then its seeds are a long, narrow seed pod that splits open to release many seeds. And so these are the photos. So on the left is the basal rosette. So it's much smaller. It's only the leaves that are present, and has the little toothed edges. And then the photo in the middle is the second year plant, where it has the flowers and the triangular shaped leaves that are very sharply toothed. And the third photo is a stand of garlic mustard. So pretty much around that tree there is pretty much only garlic mustard with a couple of other species mixed in. So the garlic mustard has really taken over that area. So because the seeds can remain in the soil for many years, it makes it a little bit difficult to manage garlic mustard. I believe it's around 7 years that the seeds can remain viable. So it really takes a long-term strategy to manage it. It's not something that you can just pull and then it's gone completely. There may always be garlic mustards that sprouts up. So hand pulling the plants before they go to seed is the best control measure, and it's really important to get the plant before it goes to seed, and then you're reducing the seed bank. So the only thing with that is that the entire plant needs to be pulled in the entire root system, because it can resprout from any roots that are left behind. And it's really important to dispose the plants in black garbage bags, because they can resprout. It's important to keep them contained, and if they're just added to a pile or a compost pile, then they're likely to resprout and continue growing. And I threw in this slide here because this is a recipe for garlic mustard pesto. So garlic mustard, it's edible. You can cook with it. I have actually had garlic mustard pesto before, and it's very good. I was doing, when I worked for a conservation authority in the summer of my second year of school, I we did a program called To Beat It, We Eat It. So students from schools would come in to one of our properties that was covered in garlic mustard, and they would spend the morning pulling the garlic mustard plants. And then in the afternoon, they would have a cooking lesson from a chef that was hired. And they made really, really good garlic mustard pesto and then pesto pizza as well. I don't think this is the exact recipe that was used during that program, but there are a lot of different recipes that are available online for it. So it's a really interesting one because you can manage it, and it also has an edible value to it. It's got a garlicky taste and smell to it. So the next invasive species that I'll talk about is dog strangling vine. So it's native to Europe, and it was introduced to the northeastern United States in the 1800s as an ornamental plant. It has rapidly spread throughout southern and central Ontario. It produces seed, it reproduces by both seed and root fragments. And it's a member of the milkweed family. It has those similar seeds where it's a pod with the cracks open with the tufts of seed that's easily spread through the wind. So again, one of its impacts is that it creates these dense monoculture stands that essentially crowd out the native plants and young trees as well. Again, many invasive species are very, very adaptable. So they have developed these strategies that allow them to thrive while outcompeting other species. So dog strangling vine, again, it's able to produce and release chemicals into the soil that discourage other plants from growing. And because of its tendency, its invasive tendencies, and the habitats it prefers, it threatens the rare ecosystems. So ecosystems like tallgrass prairies and alvars and savannas. And it's also a threat to the habitats of species at risk grassland birds like bobolinks and meadowlarks. It quite often can take over fields that these grassland birds nest and forage in. And because it's in the milkweed family, it also has impacts to the monarch butterfly. So it grows in similar habitat as the monarch's host plant, milkweed. And quite often, the butterflies mistakenly lay eggs on the dog strangling vine. And the larvae, once the larvae hatch, they're able to, so they don't have an appropriate food source available to them. So they usually end up starving. And so this is just another concern for the species, because it's now listed as a special concern. It can potentially contribute to further declines in the future. So the ID features can grow up to 2 meters in height with a stem that climbs similar to a vine. It has smooth green leaves that are arranged opposite along the stem, and they're oval in shape with a rounded base and pointed at the top. They have small pink flowers that are star-shaped, 5 petals arranged in 5 to 20 clusters. Again, the seed pods are slender, they're bean-shaped, and they go from a light green to a brown coloring. So these are 3 photos of the ID features. So you can see the the leaves on the left, and then the middle picture shows a good photo of what the seed pods look like. And then the photo on the right is the flowers. So it's another species that it's hard to control, and it can take a long time to control the species. So a management strategy that's a long-term strategy is the best way to manage the species long-term. Digging up the plants it's a viable control measure. But again, the entire root system needs to be removed, similar to garlic mustard, because it can resprout. Another way that it can be managed, more so contained, that containment aspect of management, is collecting seed pods in late summer to early fall. So this will just help reduce the seed bank and prevent the populations from growing further. And again, because they're able to resprout, they have to be disposed of in garbage bags and left to sit for a while to kill all of the plant parts. Are there any questions? That's all I had. I can stop sharing, and if anybody has any questions about any of those invasive species that I talked about, as well as any others, I'd be happy to answer any questions.